Alright, let's dive into something that's been making waves in South Africa, the National Health Insurance, NHI, Act. But here's the thing, this isn't just another policy debate. It's a legal battleground that could reshape the country's healthcare system, and personally, I think it's one of the most fascinating, and contentious, issues out there right now. Here's why. First off, the NHI Act is supposed to be a game changer, aiming to provide universal healthcare. Sounds great on paper, right? But what's really interesting is how it's being challenged in court. We're not just talking about one or two cases, there are multiple lawsuits questioning both how the act was passed and what it actually contains. And here's the kicker, these legal battles could drag on for 10 to 15 years. Yes, you heard that right. A decade and a half. That's longer than most of us have been using smartphones. What this really suggests is that the future of South Africa's healthcare system is hanging in the balance, and it's going to be a long, drawn-out fight. Now, let's zoom in on the Constitutional Court, because that's where the real action is. The court is set to decide whether the legislative process that led to the NHI Act's passage was constitutional. One thing that immediately stands out is the case brought by the Board of Healthcare Funders, BHF. They're arguing that the public participation process was flawed, basically, that people's voices weren't properly heard before the act became law. The BHF spent 18 months analyzing this process and handed the court 2,000 pages of findings. That's dedication, but it also shows how deeply contentious this issue is. What many people don't realize is that public participation isn't just a formality, it's a cornerstone of democracy. If the court agrees with the BHF, the entire act could be sent back to Parliament for a redo. Talk about a plot twist. But there's another case that's equally intriguing, the one brought by the Western Cape Premier, Alan Wind. His argument is that the National Council of Provinces, NCOP, rushed the process and didn't properly consider the Western Cape's input. From my perspective, this raises a deeper question: how much power should regional governments have in national decisions? If the court sides with Wind, the act could be sent back to the NCOP for another round of deliberations. Either way, it's clear that the NHI Act's journey is far from over. Now, let's talk about the High Court cases, because they're just as explosive. Organizations like the South African Medical Association and Solidarity are challenging specific clauses of the Act, arguing that they're unconstitutional. For example, Solidarity claims there's no viable funding model for the NHI, which, if you take a step back and think about it, is a massive red flag. How can you implement a universal healthcare system without a clear plan to pay for it? This isn't just about legal technicalities, it's about the practicality and sustainability of the entire project. What makes this really interesting is the broader debate around the NHI Act. Critics often say these legal challenges are just private healthcare providers trying to protect their profits. But in my opinion, that's oversimplifying the issue. Yes, private healthcare providers have a stake in this, but the constitutional arguments being raised are serious. The government can't just dismantle the private sector without guaranteeing that people will receive the same level of care under the NHI. That's not just a legal issue, it's a moral one. If you ask me, this is where the real tension lies, balancing the ideal of universal healthcare with the practical realities of implementation. Finally, let's not forget the human element. Healthcare isn't just a policy, it's about people's lives. While these legal battles play out, South Africans are still struggling with a healthcare system that's deeply unequal. Many speakers at the BHF conference pointed out that the private sector could be doing more to address these issues right now, instead of waiting for the courts to decide. Personally, I think that's a valid point. Why wait a decade when there are steps we can take today? So, where does this leave us? The NHI Act is at a crossroads, and the Constitutional Court's decision will be a turning point. But no matter what happens, this debate is about more than just one piece of legislation. It's about the kind of society we want to build, one that prioritizes equity, transparency, and accountability. And that, my friends, is what makes this story so compelling. What do you think? Is the NHI Act a step forward, or a legal quagmire? Let me know in the comments below.